Hey everyone, how's it going? And welcome back to part 6, the final part of this hands-on with Maxon C4D level up workshop. My name's Ellie, I'm a trainer at Maxon. And as you can see, Matt's looking a little bit different today. No, so we don't have Matt on today. He's got a well-deserved week off. He's on holiday. So my very good friend and fellow trainer, Darren, has offered to help us out today and join in. So hey Darren, thank you so much for being here with us.
You're welcome, Ellie. Hey, everybody. I'm happy to be here, but every time Matt goes on vacation, I get a little broken on the inside.
We do miss Matt a lot, but I hope he's having the best time. I'm sure he is.
Definitely.
So for anyone who doesn't know, what I'm sure we all know who you are, Darren, but Darren is a super duper master trainer at Maxon. That's his official title. It starts with super duper. And not only is he very experienced in Cinema 4D, but also Redshift. So today we're in very good hands, aren't we, Darren?
Yes, absolutely. I'm not very good at talking about myself, so thank you very much for that, Ellie.
Well,
awesome.
Don't worry, I'm here to talk you up. That's my main job, first and foremost.
I love
Also,
it.
I just want to say hey to everyone in the chat already. So hey to Ronaldo, Bern, Dan, Igor, Marcelo, Erwin, Hannah, Jay, James, Uriah, Hannah, Charles, and Greg. Hey guys, how's it going? Thanks for joining us live. And thanks to everyone who's watching this on the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel later on. Cool. So
People saying this is awesome. You guys,
yes,
this is awesome.
Yes, we do have quite a few people. So hey also to Akim and to Sean. Yeah, we like how much we interact through the questions areas.
Okay, I'm gonna do my best to interact with everyone while Ellie's going through her spiel. I'll try to keep tabs on your questions and I'll try to chime in with some answers and mess with Ellie over the course of the next 2 hours.
Absolutely. Mess with me, interrupt me, tell me if I'm doing something wrong.
Awesome.
That's what we like to do. We like to have a good time here, as everyone knows. So really quickly, before we get into it, the idea behind this workshop, if you are new, is to boost Cinema 4D artists onto the next level of their 3D journey inside Cinema 4D version 26 and also Redshift 3.5. So over the last 6 weeks, first of all, I can't believe we're on the final week already. That is crazy. But what we did, we split this into what we thought were 6 really important and key topics inside of Cinema 4D and also inside of Redshift. And you can actually find the recordings for all of these on the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. And if you want to find out about what we actually covered on the individual sessions, then in the handout section of GoToWebinar, we have a course guide or course outline, which has all the information for the different weeks. So some extra stuff. As we said, these sessions get recorded. So yes, right now this session is being recorded and they get uploaded by the next day onto the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. We have a specific playlist called Hands On, and all of these recordings and all of the particular Hands On series, set of recordings, get uploaded onto there. And don't worry, they're not going anywhere. And even better, they're timestamped. So we have to shout out and thanks Dr. Sassy, who goes through. Big up Dr. Sassy, who goes through and timestamps these 2 hours, which is invaluable. So don't worry if you ever miss anything or if you've joined in late or if you have to leave for a meeting, because I understand that, you know, time zones 2 till 4 for me may not work. I know it's 6 a.m. in Pacific. So if you are up and watching us live, thank you. So yeah, don't worry if you miss it. We got you covered pretty much.
Oh, Ellie, also, you're being called out. Yeah, so let's try and remember over the next 2 hours to get to the RS state node.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We can get to the RS state node.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
No, it's good. No, Darren, that's your job. It's okay. I like it. Always with the interruptions. It's good.
Okay.
Also, don't forget, we do have a Dropbox link with all of the project files on. So pretty much every single thing that me and Matt have been working on, whether it's modeling, whether it's scenes, whether it's different materials, should be found on that Dropbox link. If there's something we've missed, let us know and we can upload that for you. And you have unlimited access to that. So feel free to have that stuff, have those models, have those textures, break them down and just use them for whatever you want. They're yours, you can have them. And don't forget, we do like to keep this as interactive as we possibly can. So we do have the pleasure of having Darren here with us. And so keep your questions coming, give us a shout out, let us know where you're from. We want to be able to talk to you as much as we possibly can through that questions area. If you are new, inside of GoToWebinar, there should be a little questions area. You can type in your questions and then we can answer those either in the background, or we like to try and answer as many as we can live as well mid-session. And one final thing, don't forget, we do have our very own hashtag, which is #HowMaxon. And so feel free to share your work on socials, whether it's Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. We do keep track of that. I keep track of that on Instagram. I am @itwaselly. So feel free to tag me. And I do like to see what you're doing, whether it's to do with this workshop or whether it's just to do, whether you made something cool and you want to show me. That's great. All of this information, including all of the links we just talked about, can be found in the handout section of GoToWebinar. Or if you'd like the links, let us know and we can always drop them in that questions or that chat area as well. Okay, so rambling aside, intro, hosting, rambling done. Let's get into what we're going to be covering today on the final part of this Level Up workshop. We are working with Redshift. The entire session is going to be based around Redshift. So what we've been doing over the last few weeks, we've been diving into, as we said, a lot of topics inside of Cinema 4D, but we've been trying to incorporate a little bit of Redshift each and every week to get us used to this moment now. So we've been creating a couple of lights each week. We've been looking at sort of the node editor, the node graph, and we did some material blending last week. And so we're going to just take that next step further by doing a 2-hour crash course on Redshift. As you can imagine, we can't teach everything in 2 hours. If you know me, you know I like to keep things as practical as we possibly can. And so if you remember all the way back 6 weeks ago in week 1, Matt modeled that amazing arcade machine, that Steampunk arcade machine, which can be found on the project file link. And what we did, we created a couple of very simple materials for that inside of Redshift, and we did our render. Those of you who were there will know what I'm talking about. I said to you guys, hey, wouldn't it be great if you all did a render on this week, and then in the final week, we're now here, we then do a sort of a leveled up version of that render, and then you're going to have a nice comparison. So if you did do that, congratulations, you're going to have something to compare it with after this. But if not, don't worry, because at the end of the day, we're gonna have a cool looking Redshift render. So the plan is, I'm going to run through, if you've seen the hero image for this week 6, it is basically that model rendered inside of Redshift. We've got some steampunk textures, we've got some lighting, we've got some emission going on. And my plan is to spend this session running through how I created that hero image. So how I set up my lighting. One of my go-to lighting setups is a dome light, a HDRI, and then some area lights. So we're going to be doing that. We're going to be looking at tips and tricks for our lighting. We're going to be looking at some camera tricks, and then we're going to dive into node materials in a little bit more detail. So we've been sort of like scratching the surface a little bit over the last few weeks. Now we're going to be looking at some essential nodes and how we can create hopefully a nice looking steampunk texture, which will give you that knowledge, that understanding to then go on and start to make these sort of nice looking materials, hopefully in the future. We're also going to look at an overview of some of the important render settings. As you can imagine, we can't go through every single render setting, nor do we want to, because it's not going to be a very enjoyable experience for you guys, me just talking about the different settings. But we are going to talk about samples, globals, global illumination, because those are kind of like those key ones that we're going to want to adjust as we first start getting into Redshift. Of course, if you'd like to know about something else, let us know in the questions area. I'm hoping we have time to run through the AOV workflow. So AOVs are like your multi-passes inside of Redshift, which can be really great when it comes to compositing or creating like layer masks and alpha channels in Photoshop. And so hopefully have time. You know how I like to put too much information into these 2-hour sessions, but hopefully we do have time for that. And then some little extras are going to be like Redshift tags, some depth of field, and some post effects. So without further ado, let's get into actually what we're going to be doing today. So before I kick this off, do we have any questions before we even get started? Of the sort of things I know we've already said about the state node, so I'm going to try and make sure I fit in the state node.
One. Another one is the let's see, who was it? Mike.
Yeah.
Mike has expressed some curiosity about translucency in the Redshift material versus the new Redshift standard material. I think that'd be a cool little thing for us to take a look at if we can get to it.
Yes, yeah. So that's a cool conversation. Like me and Darren were literally chatting just before we kind of started the session. We were talking about the standard material versus the default material. So that's always an interesting conversation.
Okay, so here's a question that actually when we were talking earlier, you said that you wanted to get to today, and that had to do with the node versus shader graph. So do you want to, do we put a pin in that for later, or?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So my plan is I'm going to start off by basically setting up some lighting, and then from there going to go into some node materials. And so I reckon that in between we can definitely talk about and show the shader graph versus the node editor, because I'm sure Darren, you've got some comments on this as well. I know I do, and I know it's been brought up in the previous sessions. Sort of like the conversation about which one to use, like which one's better, etc. So yeah, what we do, we'll start.
Hang in there, Thomas. We'll get to it in a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. Cool. Yeah, no, that's definitely something that is on my plan for today. Okay, so let's open up the final project file that I created for that final hero image. So if I actually go into Photoshop, this was sort of the final hero image that we ended up creating. And this is, we want to kind of get to here. We may not necessarily get to our volume fog, because remember in part 2, we've already done this. So feel free to go back and check that out. But we're going to try and create the rest of this stuff-ish in 2 hours. Hopefully.
That's cool. That's a cool little scene.
Thanks. It's Matt's model, which is very cool, which we modeled in week 1. So everyone does have access to that. You also have access to this complete project file as well. But yeah, so this is sort of like the render that we have going on in our render view. We can see we have a whole bunch of lights set up, and we have a whole bunch of textures. As you said, we may not get through everything, but I want to try and get to some of the main stuff and the important stuff. So we're going to start off by opening just this version here. So all this is the backdrop that I created. So if we come out, I've got this sort of this plane with a bend that creates that nice infinite backdrop there. And then we have our Steampunk arcade machine. So as you can see, we've got no lights, we've got no materials. We've actually got nothing. We're still in our standard renderer. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to change our renderer. And that's because now with version 26 and in Redshift 3.5, we have our palettes and our toolbars that actually update because they've tried to integrate Redshift a little bit more into sort of native Cinema 4D. So if I come into my render settings, inside my renderer, this is where we can change our renderer. So if you're used to working with standard and physical, chances are you've probably come across this before. But if you are brand new, if you drop this down, this is where you'll find Redshift if you have Redshift installed. So all we have to do is change our render to Redshift, and now we are good to go. So a couple of things happened here. So the first thing that happened is these options here have actually changed. So if I just sort of quickly go back to standard and have a look at this, you will notice what we're getting here are our Cinema 4D equivalents. So our Cinema 4D lights, Cinema 4D environments. As I change this to Redshift, we then get our Redshift versions of these things. And we also get a little Redshift up here. For those of you who are used to working with the Redshift menu at the top, you can actually grab that by going into Edit Preferences. Inside of your Redshift renderer, we can enable our Redshift main menu. And then here we go, we have that lovely menu. So if you're used to working in Cinema 4D 25 and the previous release of Redshift, and you're like, where's my Redshift menu gone? That's how I like to work. Then absolutely, all you have to do, go into preferences, switch that back on, and then you can find that menu there. I'm just gonna disable that for now because I'm now used to working with these.
There isn't ever like, every once in a while, even though I've been like working in Redshift ever since they joined the Maxon family, there's still always something that I'm like, I have no idea where this is in the new layout. And I have to go to that Redshift menu.
Yes. Yeah, our little Shift C. Shift C saves my life. I try not to do it on a live show because I like to show people what things are. But yeah, sometimes I just do a little, for anyone who doesn't know, Shift C gets you the commander and you can type in, I don't know, like the start of a tool that you're looking for, and you can grab that tool. So yeah, if we change the UI, you don't know where something is, Shift C. Cool, okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to open up my render view. So remember, in week 1, we took a look at the render view and the IPR, which are basically our interactive progressive renderers, and it shows us our Redshift progressive render of things we are creating. So when we add our materials, when we add our lighting, we're going to see a render preview of that. 2 different ways to do it. We can turn our viewport into our IPR. If we come into Redshift and we go to Start IPR, we then have a viewport. So if I started to, let's say, like throw in some lighting, it's going to update, and then we can move around our scene like this. We can just come in and switch that back off. If anyone's been on one of my sessions, you know I tend to favor the Redshift render view. I like to have a separate window. There is no right or wrong. It absolutely is personal preference. So for me, I come into my window menu or my window tab, and I go to Redshift render view, and I get this secondary window. The reason I like the secondary window is because I can then dock it to the side, play my render view with this little button here, and then I can work in my viewport as normal.
Yeah,
this is just, yeah. So yeah, I was going to say, Darren, do you have a preference, or is it depending on what you're doing?
I wish I had a preference, but it depends on sort of the direction of the wind, honestly. I tend to start out in the, because of how I have my layout, I tend to start out with the viewport IPR. And then once I start, just for like my basic building up, but then once I start getting into the more detailed like node workflow, then I am not using my IPR, I'm using the Redshift render view.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool to know. Yeah, I think I've always been, I don't know whether it's because, like, you know, the luxury of working on a larger screen. I think if I was on a laptop, maybe I'd be a little bit different, I think, and be a bit more kind of like cautious with my space and use the viewport IPR. But luckily we got the room. Cool. So from this point, we can now begin to build up our particular Redshift things, whether that's our materials or our lighting or our render settings. My go-to is I like to start off with lighting, especially because if you build your materials, if you create your materials and you like how they look, and then you change your lighting or you add your lighting, things are going to look very, very different. So you may find that you have to then go back and almost redo a bunch of stuff that you've done. So at least I like to start with at least some lighting before I go in, but we're going to do majority of our lighting now. So as we said, I'm going to talk through my process of creating that hero image and my process of how I then lit this and how we create some materials. So my go-to is, or at least for this, is to start with something called a dome light. And a dome light is kind of like an environment light, and it's going to enable us to add a HDR or a HDRI image. And if you've used HDRI images before, you know they can create some really nice natural looking lighting, especially across like the entirety of your scene. And then what we're going to do, we're going to then dial in the rest of our lighting with some area lights. As we can see, we have a whole bunch of different lights inside of Redshift, all that can serve different purposes. We have our physical sun, we have a sun and sky rig, so we can actually create some nice and natural looking sunlight if we want to as well. As I said, we're going to go with a dome light. So I've got my render view still playing. And so what I do when I add my dome light, we can see that immediately has had an impact on our lighting. And I mean, even just the plain dome light alone, like for me, when I first started using Redshift and I added a dome light, I remember being like, oh my God, this is like the best thing ever. Like I just the lighting alone that just one individual light can do, I think is really amazing. So if we disable it and we enable it, very, very nice. Also, if anyone can see strange little lights and artifacts, there's an issue with my GPU at the moment, so I apologize if you can see those. Hopefully they shouldn't cause too much of an issue. Cool, so if we take a little look at our dome light, we can see the type of settings that we're perhaps used to if we've been working with lights in the past in any kind of 3D software or inside of like standard Cinema 4D. We have our intensity, which is the intensity of our light. So I can increase my intensity, we're gonna get a brighter light. Decrease my intensity, we're gonna get less light. It's kind of how it works. Exposure then works as, I believe, a multiplier for our intensity. So if I enter an exposure value of 1, it is multiplying this intensity value. I tend to stick with adjusting my intensity. It works. It works a little better for me.
Ditto. Yeah.
We can even colorize our light. So we can come in and we can get some like funky, crazy pinkiness going on, which is quite cool when it comes to volumetric lighting, which I know we looked at the end of, I think, last week's session, because you know our dome light can have a volume contribution to our volumetric lighting. Therefore, if we colorize or we tint our light, we're going to effectively then be tinting our volumetric lighting or fog or atmosphere. So this can be used for a couple of different purposes. This little box here, this is my favorite and my most important box when it comes to working with the dome light. And this is where we can drag and drop our HDRI image. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come into my asset browser, which I'm going to be using quite a bit today. And I love the asset browser. I don't know about you, Darren, but I use it literally day to day, whether it's for a HDRI image, whether it's for different textures or objects. It's full of amazing things.
Okay, wait. Did you just say in reference to the asset browser? I don't know about you, Darren.
I know it's your favorite thing, right?
Yes, you totally know.
Darren loves the asset browser.
I love it. I love it. I was skeptical about it, but when they, when we switched from the content browser to this new asset browser and this asset system, I was skeptical and hesitant, but I threw myself into it and I love it. I love how Maxon is now distributing assets, so you don't have to download everything at once. I love how we can create our own databases and share them with other people, and they're always updated. I love how we can, and this is the biggest deal of all, I think, for me, is that you can create versions of any asset, and that we've never had before until the asset browser, and that is by itself awesome.
Yes, it is like one of my favorite things that came in like the last couple of releases, and we update, like there's new things like every single month, so it's not just like this is what it is and this is all you get. New things, especially in 26. Yeah, with Donovan, 26.1 came with like amazing surface imperfections, which I use a lot now.
And yeah, we finally got some amazingly created new Redshift architectural materials. But anyway, this isn't a marketing session. Sorry, everybody.
It's not a plugin. It comes included. We are not paid to say these things. Cool, yeah, so HDR images inside of our dome light. So already the dome light, as we can see, is actually casting some nice light, but we can take this a step further and make this even nicer by adding a HDR image. And the HDR image is going to have a really big impact on the way that this looks. So I quite like this. If I make this a little bit bigger, so hopefully you guys can see this a little bit clearer. One of my go-tos is this GI empty room. I just really like the lighting it does, especially when it comes to like metal materials, because we have this sort of like slightly bluish hue, which I think works really nice with our metals. And so all we have to do is drag and drop this into our texture. If you have like downloaded your HDRI images from somewhere else and they're on your computer, all you have to do is the same thing, drag and drop them in. So you can drag and drop that in here. It didn't need to download, but if you haven't had it before, it will just download. It takes a couple of seconds. And then now we can see we have our dome light inside of here. And if I actually pull out, we can see our dome light around in our environment. So much like we used to, if you're used to working with Cinema 4D Sky, and then you add a HDR with your material into the luminance, we used to be able to see it. So from here, what we can do is we can actually adjust this lighting before we even come into these settings by rotating our dome light and effectively rotating that HDR image. So if we have the light coming from a certain direction, we're going to be casting some nice shadows. So if I just hit my R key, I'm going to get my rotation bands, and then I can start to rotate this. And we can see that we're getting a different look dependent on the rotation of this here. And so what do I want to go for? Let's get some sort of shadows going on. This is quite cool. This is quite nice. So I'm hoping you guys can't hear this. I've got my window open because it's very, very hot at the moment in the UK. Yes, at last, I'm not going to complain. But there is a plane going over the top. So I'm glad you can't. I can't shut the window. Yeah. It's definitely too hot.
Cannot hear a thing other than you.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So all I've done so far is add my dome light, add my HDR and rotate that. And already we're getting some nice looking lighting. Once we've dropped our texture in, we then have access to our color, a couple of color options. So hue, saturation and gamma. And for this, what I might even, do you know what I might even do? I might even change this to be sort of like a more sort of orangey tint, because remember we're going for this steampunk-esque theme. So everything is like bronze, everything's copper. That's the sort of like style that we're going to go for. And so let me just sort of pull this maybe over. But as we can see, or at least for me, this is way, way too saturated. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to come into my saturation, and these are the settings for our particular texture. So remember, what we're adjusting here is the texture, hue, saturation, and gamma. And we're going to come in, maybe we're going to half this, and now we have this lighting, and this is looking okay for me. So those of you who are wondering, how do we not see our image in the background? Because I can imagine we don't really want to see, you know, your nan's carpet and curtains here in the background, do we? No. So the way that we can turn this off is actually by coming into our environment and just switching off our background. And now you can see, we can just see sort of like infinite space inside of Cinema 4D. But this is a question that got asked during the Redshift workshop. What if you want to have a different background? Let's say you've created your own background. Well, we can take advantage of this backplate option. So I just downloaded like super quickly just a warehouse image. And so we can use this as our backdrop or our background whilst still using our HDRI image to light with. So the way that we do that is we have to enable our backplate. We then drag and drop our texture into here. And then we need to make sure our background is therefore switched on. And this is going to overtake the background of this one. So if I switch that on, we can now see we have our texture in there, created as a backdrop, but we're still lighting with this original HDRI image. And also, if I drop this down, you have the ability to add a PNG sequence, so you could have an animated backdrop or animated HDRI image as well. And no, this was a question that came up in the past.
So the texture loaded up above, that's actually creating the lighting and reflections and all that stuff. That is not the same one that we see in the background.
Correct.
Okay, awesome. Sorry, I was answering a question, and then I got confused.
No, it's cool. No, it's cool. No, I wanted to show how you can have the two. If you did, for example, want a texture as your backdrop, you can do that without worrying about it affecting your lighting.
So actually, this is actually like what I did, what I do most of the time when I need to disconnect between what I see in the background and what's going on with the lighting and everything. But I actually got a question from one of our friends at Pixelogic on the ZBrush team, and he was asking me, well, how do I, with this dome light, how do I make it so that I have one dome light that has this color, or texture, or whatever, but then I can just change the background's color, like on the fly. And can I share my screen? Because I want to show that.
Oh yeah, cool, yeah.
It's all about the dome light.
Is it two dome lights, one without intensity? Or would that not work?
Girl.
Is it? Oh my god, am I right? Am I right? Yeah. Hang on, let me throw it over to you.
That's it.
I'm so smart. Let me throw it over to
you. Let's see. Screen. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Oh my gosh, this camera window is in the way. I have to minimize that. Oh my gosh, I forgot about all the GoToWebinar things that don't go away. Okay. So I actually created a preset for this. Let's see if I can find it. An asset. So it's probably going to be in whatever. I'll do a objects, Darren's. Nope, it's not the new pills object. We're currently beta testing this new object called the pills object, but that's not what I'm looking for. Let's go.
You load it into your scene and then he does all the work for you? At least that's what he does for me.
Oh, yeah. That'd be awesome. But it is two dome lights. And let me just get this in here. And, oh, there we go, fine. Oh, that's not it. All right, cool. So we got this guy and then dome light. So this will be HDR, and then I'm going to duplicate it, and this one will be the background color. Okay, so in the HDR, I'll go ahead and get an HDR in there, just randomly picking one. So there it is in the background, and I don't actually want it to be visible in the background, so I'm going to turn that off. Now in the color one, it's just all about this. I mean, that's the thing. He just wanted to be able to do this, just to change the color, on the fly. But the lighting, be on the HDR. So the problem is when we render here, this being in the general category and not the backplate, it's going to actually be messing with the lighting. So the workaround is in the details tab, set these to 0. So it's not going to create any diffuse lighting or contribute to reflections, transmission, single or multi-scattering, GI, or volume. It's just, and we don't really need it to do shadows. This is all off. So now all it is a background color while the HDR is doing all the lighting. Yeah, so that's it. That's my little trick with the dome light so that you can have, you can adjust the color of the background while.
I like that. That's so, I think it's really clever. I think some people would like not think to necessarily use two different dome lights, but I love piling lights upon lights. Like I'll use like the sun and a dome.
Yeah, I mean, totally. You have to layer your lights up, but I think this is easier than like adding a graph to this and then adding a color node, because now I'd have to go into the node to change the color, but here it's all there anyway. Take the screen from me.
Take it away. Take it away. Show my screen. Cool. So there was another quick question. I was just having a look from Uriah about shifting the back plate up, down, left, or right. So this it can be rotated. So think of the dome light as it's like a vector environment. So we can't actually move it up and down. So if I sort of come into here and I come, oh no, I've rotated it, and I grab my dome light, if I get my move, oh, I need to have it on show. Let me just hide this quickly. If I show my background, and let's get to a point where we can actually see something. If I try and like move it up and down, you'll notice that it doesn't actually move up and down. We're only able to rotate it. And that is the case for the dome light, unfortunately. A small potential trick is to move your entire scene up. That would then effectively work. So if we look at this shot here, and then I grab all of these elements, and if I sort of lift them up and then come up, we're kind of doing the same thing, but we're not really doing it. So we can rotate the dome light, but we are not able to move it up and down.
Yeah, because we don't really get the node, we don't get the same texture node options in the dome light, right? Because if it was in a texture node, then we would have the offsets.
Yeah. Another potential workaround is something that you showed me, Darren. And I'm just going to sort of talk about it because I do want to get on to some of the other lighting things here. But it was using a plane with the, testing me now. What was the deformer? What was the deformer where? Spline wrap deformer. So if you get a plane with a spline wrap deformer, you can almost create that same like backdrop type thing, and then you can move the plane and adjust the plane, and you're effectively then moving your background and your backdrop. So that's always a hand. I remember when you showed me that, I was like
behind windows. That was like behind some windows or something.
Yeah. So for example, if I didn't have my back plate here, my backdrop, and I know I can see this area of my back plate or my dome light or whatever I have in the background. If I grabbed myself a plane, threw it on a spline wrap.
I think it could have been a spline wrap, or it could be like the spherify, or even just a bend, just to get it to sort of.
Or on a bend, and then all you have to do is then throw your image onto a texture, drop that on there, and then you can move the plane. That's a nice way of sort of working around the fact that the dome light doesn't sort of have the ability to go up and down at all. Okay, cool. Yeah, so keep those questions coming in. What I'm going to do, we're going to now add some different lighting. We're going to sort of like finish off our lighting here just with a couple of area lights. So our dome light really is the thing that's doing the magic here. It's doing the great lighting for us. But what I'm also going to do, I'm going to drop in a couple of different area lights just to bring up, just sort of create some shadows, create some sort of tint going on, and just sort of brighten up this thing entirely. So what we're going to do, we're going to come in and we're going to grab an area light. And straight away, we have our area light in our scene with some preset settings going on. And so the first thing I do before I even change any of my settings is I like to set up, I like to target my area lights. One, because it's a great little trick, and two, because I can be a little bit lazy sometimes. So I like to be honest with everyone. So if you right click onto your light or onto your area light, we can come into animation tags and we can grab what's called a target tag. And what this is going to do, this is going to say, hey, what do you want the target object to be? And our light is going to therefore then face that object. No matter where I move it, it's always going to face it. So what we could do, we could drop in our Steampunk arcade machine, or for even more control, I like to drop in a null. And then with my null, so my little null in here, I can reposition this to exactly where I'd like my lights to be targeting. So I'm going to go like front, sort of like front central. Then let's just call this our light target null. And inside of our target tag, let me just go into icon size large so we can see that a little bit clearer. I'm going to drop in my light target null. And then you saw that that just jumped to now facing that null. And the reason this is so great is because now if I reposition my light, it's always going to be facing my little Steampunk arcade model. And even cooler, if I find that I'd like to target a particular area of my arcade thingy model, I can actually move my null instead, and you can see the light is now following that. So I can really kind of dial in exactly the type of areas that I want to be lit by this area light. Cool, so let's change some things because we can see this area light is a little bit too intense right now. It's got a lot of light going on. So let's take a look at our area light and take a look at some of these settings. And what's nice is, again, if you're used to working in 3D or used to working in Cinema 4D, some of these, the names of things and the settings are nice and generic. So again, much like our dome light, we have our intensity and we have our exposure. So we can control our intensity and our exposure is going to be a multiplier. So by default, 100 is a little bit intense. And also remember the size of your light will also have a direct correlation to the intensity. So if I just sort of like pull this up, we can see we have a really bright light with an intensity of 100. If I make my light smaller, so instead of adjusting my intensity, I'm going to adjust my size. If I make it smaller by just hitting my T key, you can see that we're actually getting less intense light going on. So remember that your size is going to be as important as your intensity.
Yeah, it also affects how hard or soft the shadows are.
Yes. Oh, good point. Yeah. So if we change to normalize intensity, then what's going to happen is the size won't be having a difference, just our intensity. Cool. Right. So let's do some things with this. Let's do some stuff with it. So first of all, I'm going to actually change my shape. I like to work with a sort of like a disc shape. Sometimes you can get like harsh lines with the rectangle, but again, you know, it's personal preference. It's what you're used to and it's what you like to set up with. And I'm going to have this one roughly to like the left hand side. Let me just get my null a little bit more inside here. So this is going to be like top left. And so a lot of people do what we call 3-point lighting. So you have key fill rim, key fill back, however you want to name it. I'm not necessarily going for 3-point lighting because I tend to name mine based on their position. I would have a left light, a right light, back light, top light, because I tend to do a little bit more than 3 when I'm creating a setup. So we have this here, again, intensity is way too high. So let me just pull this down to something like 10. And one thing I do like to do is I actually like to disable all the rest of my lighting in my scene to get a good idea as to how this is influencing my render. So as we can see, we're getting this nice like left light coming in and we get these really sort of like dark shadows on the right hand side, which is fine because we're going to add some more lights. And again, remember our dome light is creating that all over natural lighting. So this is cool. I may even tint this. So we could tint this a little bit. We go a little bit sort of orangey because again, I'm trying to keep to this sort of like steampunk aesthetic. So I had a little look on Pinterest because I love Pinterest for some reference images. for this. So let's sort of go with that. Cool. So again, I'm just going to, as I said, you know, I like to name my lights based on their position. So I've got my light, which is to the left, and then I'm going to duplicate it, and it's going to be my light, which is going to go to the right. And again, because I've duplicated it, we have all the same settings, and we also have that target tag on here as well. And I can just sort of pull this over, and then maybe we can just sort of have this up here, just sort of casting some extra light on this side, maybe even reduce our intensity. So we still get a nice contrast going on. We don't want to blow this out too much. We don't want to have too kind of like crazy light in. I'm imagining this is like just being in a bit of like a dark and dingy warehouse. Cool, and the final one we're going to do, we're just going to grab ourselves a top light, just so we can then move on to some materials. And then let's just sort of move this and have it cast some light on the top. So let me just disable these, and just to see what this top one's doing. We're getting just this nice light on the top, nice little sort of like rim light or top light going on these little edges. Even though this doesn't know much at the moment, it's only because we don't really have any material. We don't have any materials at all, not even default materials. This is just sort of like the display gray that we have going on. But if we can get our lighting to start to look nice now, it's going to make our materials like pop. So let me switch all my lights back on and see what we've got going on. Okay, so I might even reduce the intensity of my dome light a little bit. I may find when I create my materials that it's fine, but for now, I'm just going to reduce that down. Cool. So one trick that I didn't show that I did want to get round to was how we're sort of setting up a camera and how we can then lock the camera in our render view, and we can change our lights in the viewport really nicely, really easy, without having to worry about being in our camera view, and we get to see it kind of update live. And so what I mean by that is if we create ourselves a camera, and we can create just a standard camera, and then we can add a Redshift camera tag to it. So all we have to do is create ourselves a normal camera. We can look through it by hitting this little icon here. So if it's gray, you're not looking through your camera. If it's white, you're looking through your camera. I'm just going to adjust my focal length. I think I went with about like an 80 millimeter focal length, and just let's find like a sort of a rough final position that we like. So this looks quite cool. This is quite nice. So let's say I like this position, but I want to adjust my lights, and I don't want to have to worry about, you know, adjusting them just from this view. Well, what we can do, we can come into this drop down here. So again, a benefit of working inside of the render view is we can come into this drop down and we can choose the camera. So you could have multiple cameras set up. We can choose the camera view that we want, and it's going to lock to that view automatically. Now, if I come out of my camera, I can now move around, and you'll notice that my render view is still giving me that camera view. So now I can come in here and I can really sort of, you know, move my area lights exactly where I want them and see it update live inside of here. So this is a nice little trick I like to use sometimes.
You know what's really cool to do with that?
Tell me.
The set active object as camera.
Yes.
Because then you can look through that light and move around. So you see, and so there it is, selected object as camera. So the area light top is selected. When she clicked the command, she's now using that light like a camera, and she's moving around in her view like she does normally in a camera, but the light's moving with it, and you can see that in the render view. The results.
So if I increase my intensity, it's a bit more obvious.
Yeah, I love doing.
I do love that. I don't do that as often, but probably should. Cool. No, I do like that little. Let's go back to my normal camera. Cool. Okay, so this was my lighting setup. Well, this was sort of like the base behind the lighting setup that I ended up with on this. And if we sort of group all these, I like to pretend that I keep things organized. If we just press Option G with everything selected, so I've got all my lights, I've got my dome light, my area light, and my area light null, and we can just call this our RS lights. And so if I disable these, we don't really see anything. I wanted to see, let me just sort of like disable them this way so we can see exactly the difference that we've just made with just a couple of lights. So this is what we had at the very beginning. This was sort of our default look. And then we dropped in our 4 lights. Bless you.
Thank you.
And then, that's okay. And then now we have this going on. And so I'm quite happy with how this looks. And this is going to be a really nice starting point to now start to include some materials. We may find later on we may want to tweak our lights just slightly. So I've reduced the intensity of my dome light. I may find that I may increase it when I start to have some more materials in here and a bit of a darker looking scene. But for now, I'm quite satisfied with how this is. Do we have? Oh, thanks. Do we have any questions on those sort of things that we covered before we get into our node material convo?
Not really. I've been answering questions. I'm cool. Going over them again.
No, that's cool. Thanks for answering them as well.
Oh, you're welcome. Everybody's very welcome. Yeah, no questions about what you just went over.
Sweet, cool. Good, we are good to go. So that's.
Oh, actually, Marcos just now asked, can you show us again where that select object as camera command is located?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So the main thing is you want to make sure the object that you then want to be seeing through, in this case, it's going to be my top area light. You've got to make sure that's selected. And then we go into camera, use camera, and then you get this option here, which is selected object as camera. And if I click that, it will then set that area light, that top area light, as my camera. And then we can come back out of it by then just coming back in and selecting my normal camera.
So you just go like boop, pop.
Boop, boop. Sound effects must be done, otherwise it doesn't work. Okay, right, so node materials. Node materials, I think we can, anyone who's used Redshift, so I'm sure Darren can vouch from here, I can definitely vouch for this. Node materials is probably one of the steepest learning curves in Redshift. And the reason I can say this is because I only learnt Redshift about a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit over a year and a half ago. And so I totally remember, I'm totally where you guys are if you are new to Redshift. I still remember when I first opened that node graph, and I hadn't worked with nodes at all. I'd not really worked with Cinema 4D nodes. And I remember being like, wow, this is quite overwhelming. This is quite scary. And so I am not kind of oblivious to the fact that it can be quite scary working, or quite daunting learning node materials, but they are great, they are powerful. What you can do with them is incredible, but don't get too worried about all this stuff that you can do. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on the sort of the getting started into our nodes. So we're going to start off by looking at some essential nodes, how we can adjust our base properties, which are going to be really important, and then how we can just start to do and build up and layer up those materials. And we're gonna get used to that first, because that's the important stuff. As soon as that then clicks, I guarantee it will change your life. Like when you suddenly go, I remember there was a day I was like, oh my God, I actually get this. I actually know how to do these materials. And the chances are, I'm sure Darren, we use a lot of the same nodes over and over again. Yeah. The likelihood of you needing to use a crazy random outrageous setup will be on the odd occasion. And so don't worry too much about all of those things. Let's start off by just learning how to create some cool looking materials, blending some things together, use some surface imperfections.
You only need to know all the nodes if you're a technical director and you actually are doing more of the technical prep and setup for the artists. But if you're more like just a day-to-day artist, you're going to be using like 10%, if that, of, you know, of everything there.
Yeah.
Elly, do you do, when you get into the material, do you do that? Do you, you remember how I did that breakdown of the categories and how they compared to the classic cinema material? Like I fold them up?
Yeah, yes. So I do, I do open up a standard material and then have like the base properties side by side, just as like a nice sort of comparison.
Awesome.
But we can definitely talk about it. The first thing I'm going to do is the long anticipated shader graph versus C4D node editor conversation. Because I've been using the shader graph literally up until March of this year. I'm gonna hold my hands up, was strictly shader graph. Everyone that's watched the beginners Redshift workshop will know, because it was all in the shader graph. But with the new integration and the new updates, I think it was Charles, I may be wrong, Charles was asking earlier about our improvements to the viewport coming for Redshift materials. Well, actually in 26 and in Redshift 3.5, if you look at a comparison of before and after, there have been some really, really great improvements with Maxon noise, with reflections, with textures, textures. And so I know, yes, it's not perfect, but progression and development is kind of going in the right direction.
And also those improvements are specific to the nodes interface, not the shader.
So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the shader graph versus the node editor. So for the sakes of this, I'm just going to create two sort of like just default Redshift materials. So I'm going to double click. So because I changed my render to Redshift, when I open up my material editor, when I double click, I'm going to open up a default Redshift material, which is going to be C4D's node editor.
Wait, did you set that in preferences?
No, that is so yeah, I don't, for the purposes of live shows, I try and not change too much.
Cool.
So this is like the default go-to. And then what we can do is we can create a shader graph version, which for me, I'm just going to go to material, tools, convert material. And what this is going to do is this is going to give me the RS material again, but this is going to be our shader graph version. So let me just put C4D node editor, just so we can keep track of everything. And I'm going to open this one up. So here is, let's get these guys side by side. Node editor, shader graph. Let me get the corner. Here we go. So as we can see, they do look a little bit different. The nodes, for a start, do look very different. So this effectively is the same material. Let me just avoid the confusion by adding the same color. White would be great. I would love to have seen my face there being like, why is this not worked? Cool, yeah, so these are the same material, the exact same material. They are both Redshift default materials.
Yeah, the only difference at this point is the interface and how the material is previewed in the editor view.
Yes. So when it comes to the shader graph, so let's move this little dude over here for now. So inside the shader graph, if you like to work in here, this is the Espresso node editor. So we have our nodes, we can select a node, we can move it around, we can do these little funky things inside of here. And then we have our properties of the specific node in the same window on the right-hand side. So this is a nice little feature. So if I have a node here selected, we can see that we get our properties here that update. If I want to add a node, all we have to do, we can drop these down if we want to, or we can type in the name of the node that we want. So if I wanted a bump map, I just have to type in the word bump. I then get my options in here, and I can drag and drop it in. So this is the workflow for the shader graph. And as Darren said, there are some differences between the two. So if I then, let's move this one back over and let's come back to our node editor just to see how we would do that same equivalent thing. So how we find the sort of the attributes of our node and how we'd add a node, because they're both very different. So inside of our Cinema 4D node editor, if I have my node selected, what you'll notice is it actually adds or shows my attributes inside my Cinema 4D attribute manager. So this little area here, when we select an object, this little area here, this little kind of like this window is called the attribute manager. So we have our objects manager, we have a material manager, we have our viewport, etc. This is the attributes manager. And so now with this sort of the more integration of Redshift, the idea behind it is when you then select your node, you also get its attributes in that same attribute manager.
This is very classic Cinema 4D behavior.
Yes. So where if you're used to the shader graph, I can appreciate that having it on this sort of like secondary same window was great. We can all admit that it was really nice. It was great to be able to adjust, but very quickly you do get used to this. And the idea behind it as well is, for me, if I'm doing like a live demonstration, I often like to dock my windows. So if I have my C4D node editor docked, when I then adjust this, it's natural to then be coming to my attributes manager. So it doesn't make too much of a difference to my life now that it's not directly there. And Darren, I want to know your thoughts on this. Are you used to it now?
About docking it like that?
About sort of, inside the shader graph where we have our settings on this same window, sort of directly here, versus being in here and having the attributes manager.
It's so we being on the Maxon training team, we are blessed and cursed with having to essentially use all of them, right? But God, it's because we're still sort of like in a state of flux with the we're still integrating, right? It's still coming together. It's hard to say. What I can say is that I like the aesthetics of the node editor of the Cinema 4D nodes. I like how most of the time you can search for a node and drag and drop it onto the line, and it will create a connection, which I don't think we've shown yet. I like that. I like the solo feature here, with another thing that
we're gonna have a little look at that.
So there's like some aesthetic and interactivity things that I like about the nodes. I think the Maxon did some very intelligent, very usable, very cool things with this node editor. But the Redshift shader graph I prefer because it does not have the limitations that the node editor has. Like we don't get the multi-shader, for example, in the node editor. And that is not a big deal for me to use just the shader graph, because I am less invested in having a okay editor preview. I'm most interested in pressing that IPR button, right?
Yeah.
I want to see what it looks like rendered, not how it's being previewed. So, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah. No, that's good. I think that's really important stuff to talk about. Like that's what we want to do. Like we want to be as honest as we can with you guys, because you experience these same things that we do, and you experience these changes, and so we want to be able to give you all the information that we possibly can so you can make your own minds up as to what you want to do, because at the end of the day it is, like we say, the same as the IPR, same as the render view. A lot of it's personal preference. As Darren said, multi-shader C4D shaders aren't available in the C4D node editor. whereas they are in the shader graph. Whereas on the other side, to what sort of, I'm pretty sure it was Charles, I feel really bad if it wasn't you, Charles, what Charles was saying about having the viewport preview, we do the improved viewport preview is only when you're working with C4D's node editor.
Okay.
And so like Darren was saying, it's about what's most important to you and what you think is the most important way of working that goes with your style, that's going to help your workflow and optimize your working at the end of the day.
Can you real quick?
Yeah.
Can you real quick, just because Sharon has asked a question, or not a question, but she's saying that she also really likes the new nodes, especially the thin film and the new standard material. Can you real quick, just to show Sharon for the record, can you do a search for the standard material in the shader graph? Because I believe it is still available there. Yes, it is. So yeah, so the new Redshift standard material is also available in the shader graph. Okay, sorry, Elly.
No, it's cool. No, it's good to show. Like you said, good to show. Cool. Yeah. So I hope that sort of slightly demystifies the shader graph versus C4D node editor for you all. As you said, both completely viable ways of creating materials. And just as a quick thing, because I did show how to create a node inside of the shader graph, to create a node inside the node editor, all you have to do is double click and you get the nodes version of like your asset browser, and then we can search a node, which in this case I'm going to match what I did before, was grabbing a bump map, and then we drag and drop that in, and then that is now inside of here. So that is how we create our nodes inside of the node editor. So total sort of disclaimer here, I'm now going to be working in the C4D node editor. That's what I'm going to be working in today. But again, everything is completely transferable into the shader graph. The nodes will be the same, the setup will be the same. So feel free to use whatever is your preference. Okay, so again, let's do a quick comparison with the Redshift material, or the Redshift standard material, because that's sort of what we're going to be taking a look at, and the C4D standard material.
Actually, I got to interrupt you. Sorry, Elly. So before we get into those details, there's one more interface thing that I think we need to share with them, and that is
absolutely
the material editor versus the node or shader graph window when you double click. Right, you're in 26.1.
Am I in 26.1? I don't know if I'm in 26.1.
Could you just go to your preferences real quick and go to material?
This is so bad if I'm not in 26.1.
I'm sure you are. Let's see. So let's go to the materials preferences. There we go. So the very last option there, always open node editor, is on. So what that means is whenever Elly double clicks on a material, it's going to open up the node editor or the shader graph, depending on the type of interface. Now, if that's off, then when you double click, you're going to get the material editor window. Okay, and that's going to give you all of those properties, much like the classic Cinema 4D material system.
Yes.
And this is a really great way to just sort of quickly rough in your settings. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out. There, you have that option for when you double click, it will always open the material editor or always open the node or shader graph.
Cool, that's cool to show. Yeah, thanks, Darren. And also, in case you then get to here and you then want to open node editor, all you have to do, hit your little node editor button, and then you get that save window.
Booyah!
Booyah! So yeah, by default, mine is always open node editor, because the chances are I'm going to be doing some stuff in the nodes, not just the base properties. So I like to make things hard for myself. No, I don't. Okay, cool. So let's do a quick comparison, and then we can actually create this material. So let me create a, if I do, how can I get just a standard C4D material from here? Do you know, or do I have to sort of do some magic stuff?
If you just want a classic Cinema 4D material, you have to switch to the Cinema 4D renderer and create the material.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, we'll do that, and then we're going to go back just so I can get that. And let's open up our, this is our standard Cinema 4D material editor.
The classic, the original.
C4D, the original, what we all used to work on pre Redshift days.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I might do is let me, do you know what? Actually, for this little comparison, let me get the material editor up, because I think it, is it not going to let me open the two? Well, that's annoying, isn't it?
You can do a pop out of the attribute manager.
Yeah.
And
oh man, I thought I was going to be really clever there and get to open the two. You used to be able to open them side by side.
What are you trying to do again?
I just wanted both material editors up, but it kept replacing it. You used to be able to open the standard C4D material editor and the Redshift material editor. Okay, so let's do a quick comparison, because as we said, you know, nodes can be a little bit scary to first learn. And so if you're used to working inside of standard Cinema 4D materials, let's have a look at some nice comparison things here. So let's get rid of this guy, and let's sort of come down here. C4D. Right, okay, so in C4D's material editor, we are used to working with our different channels. So we have our color, diffusion, luminance, transparency, all those things, all those base properties, those layers that we would need when we are creating our material. So when we come into our color, with it enabled, we can control the color of our material. If we take a look at our Redshift material, we have a similar type of thing. So we are able to control the color, which is known as our diffuse, inside of here. We can create a same sort of pinky material. So they are transferable. Back to C4D materials, a very important sort of channel that we tend to do a lot of our work in, especially if we're creating what we call PBR materials, which are you know, like our physical materials, is inside of our reflectance channel, and we often add our different reflectance layers based on the material that we're creating. So a lot of what I would do is, if I was creating a metal material, I would create a GGX layer, then I would adjust my Fresnel. It's a similar kind of thing. If we come into our Redshift C4D material, we have our reflection areas. So if I just sort of like drop all these up and we drop them down, so our reflection channel is effectively like our reflectance channel. Again, we have our BRDF, which are our reflectance, our reflectance sort of types, so our type of material that we're creating. We have the ability to adjust our reflection color, weight, and roughness. And so this is where you would control and adjust those settings, much like you used to inside of your C4D material. Another super useful channel is our transparency channel. So if we want to create like glass materials and things like that. Inside of here, the way that we would do this, so bearing in mind, this is, I've opened up a default Redshift material. Have I opened up? Yes, a default Redshift material. We haven't got a standard Redshift material. And so what we can do inside of refraction and transmission, these are our effectively transparency settings. So if I increase my weight, so think of a weight value as being sort of like enabling this, you're switching it on, you're sort of adding this layer to your material. So if I increase my weight, we now have our transparent material. Again, we can control the color of this. And then back in here, we then have a bunch of other useful settings that we could need. The difference here, so the biggest difference between C4Ds, well, there's big differences, but one of the big differences is beforehand where we used to enable our bump input. What you'll notice is inside of our Redshift material, we don't have that kind of setting in here. We don't have that setting in here. And so what this means is we would then need to create a node which effectively is going to enable our bump. And we're going to look at this in a little bit when we start to create our materials. And so this is where things Redshift starts to sort of take over with a slightly different way of setting things up. So let's get rid of our C4D material and let's get rid of these. And let's start to actually build up a Steampunk material. So what we're going to do is we're going to build up that metal material that we had here. I'm going to try and make it identical, because otherwise it's a bit of a cop-out if I just make a not very cool version on the live. So I'm going to try and make the same kind of one here. And this is going to use a bunch of different nodes and a bunch of different settings. So we've already done material blending. And so that's going to be a nice sort of thing that we recognize from last week. So let's go into my camera and let's create Redshift. And we're going to create the new standard material. And so the standard material has actually a different series of base properties. It's a much more industry standard way of working, and it's a much more intuitive material. We can create some really, really amazing results that just look great. And that's the point, right? That's the whole point, especially when it comes to making metals, and that's sort of what we're going to focus on. So what we're going to do, we're going to grab our standard material and we're just going to title this Steampunk Metal. And we're going to drop this onto our arcade machine. And these are the areas that it's gone over, which is great. So later on, we're going to look at polygon selections and how we can change some of these areas to be different colors. But for now, we want to focus on just building up our tasty looking Steampunk material. So let's open up our node editor and we're going to be working entirely in here. So let's give ourselves a little bit of room. And we're going to be, let me just move this out the way, move my little GoToWebinar control panel out the way. Okay, cool. So if we take a look at this material, we've got a lot going on. We've got sort of this like bronzy metal, we've got some scratches, we've got some drips going on. We've got some bump and some dirt and some nice reflections. And so what I want you to do, the way I want you to think about this material and potentially the materials you create in the future, is think about the different layers. So what I mean is when you first buy a new car, even if you don't drive, think about a brand new car, you know, oh, it's nice, isn't it? It's glossy, it's shiny, paint's perfect. You've not driven into a wall a couple of times like I have. Like, it looks great, looks perfect. After a couple of months or years, if we looked at that same car, we looked at that same texture, that car paint, chances are it's going to have some scratches in it, it's going to have some marks on it, it's going to have some dirt on it, it's going to pretty much look like my car does now outside. And that's the way I want you to think about how you're going to layer up these materials when you want to create more detailed materials like this. So I'm not talking about just like a standard material or just sort of like a nice glossy plastic. We're talking about something like this that has layers of imperfection and a bump and scratches. And so what we want to do is we want to start at the beginning. So when we first looked at this arcade machine, when we first bought our first car and it looked nice, let's think about that first layer first, and then we're going to build it up gradually. So let's go back into Cinema 4D. And so we're thinking of our base metal, our nice, fresh, clean metal. That's what we want to create here with this first stage. So what I'm going to do, we want to create a metal material. Inside of the new Redshift standard material, we have a lovely slider that's named Metalness. And it's so easy to use. If we want to create a metal material, just pull that up. pull that up, and then we get a metal material. It is as simple as that. It is so nice to use. And so now we've created a metal. We've gone from having basically a sort of a non-metal, like a bit of a plasticky, like rough metal, rough sort of plastic, to this one here now. And then what we can do, we can define the color, the base color of our metal with this base color value in here. And so let's create that steampunk, like bronze kind of material. And what we're going to do is let's come into here, perhaps maybe something a bit like this. Maybe that's a bit too orange. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I want to get something that I'm pretty happy with. All right, cool. I'm happy with that. Cool. So I've defined the color of my material and my metal, and I've effectively made it a metal material by increasing my metalness input. Again, we can now come into the next stage of this, the next stage of our base properties. So remember that we're still only on our base properties at the moment, because these are the things you want to make sure that you've got done before you then add those second layers. Because if you add those second layers and then you change these settings, you're going to get a totally different result. Reflection is quite important. This reflection color is actually quite important, because if I put this to something crazy like blue, you can see how much of an impact this reflection color is actually having on our material. So my go-to is I tend to just copy the original material and then just create a slightly lighter version, just so it complements it quite nicely. So we get that nice sort of like reflection, but it's a similar kind of color palette. From in here, we don't need any transmission. Because we're not worried about, you know, creating a glass or a transparent material, nor are we worried about any of these other sort of settings in here. We're going to have a look at coat and emission on a different material. But for this one here and for our steampunk one, these are actually the only base properties that we want to worry about. So from here, we've made these adjustments. At the moment, we've got a little bit of roughness going on. So if I reduce my roughness to a value of 0, we have 0% roughness, aka we have a super shiny glossy metal, which we can now see here in my render view. If I put my roughness on a value of 1, the highest number it can go, we effectively have what we would call 100% roughness. So we have it's basically a fully diffuse material. Mm-hmm. But the trouble is, this is doing these values and this roughness settings across the entirety of the surface of our material. But what if we want to have slightly different values, so just to create a more realistic looking shot? So, you know, if you had like a nice wooden floor and you look at it, unless it's brand new, chances are it's not going to be completely like glossy or completely rough in every single place. It's going to have some slight imperfections. And this is what we want to do. And this is what we can start to do to create some potentially more realistic, or at least more detailed looking materials. And so we can control this value here, or a lot of these values, with texture maps, and in particular grayscale texture maps. And so I want to show you how we can do this, because this is going to change your lives, trust me. So again, in our little asset browser, if we type in think of a keyword like dirt or smudge or scratch or something like that to get some imperfections, I'm going to type in the word dirt, and it's going to give me my dirt maps. And we have some pretty great ones on here. You can probably get an idea of the ones that I used. So I'm going to start off with this one here. So we double click this just so you guys can see exactly how this looks. This is this dirt map, and they're all tileable. This is what we're going to do. The way that we can bring this in, or the way that we can bring any dirt map in, or any texture that you have, whether it's in your Finder or like different folders on your computer or in the asset browser, we just have to drag and drop it in. And it's now as a node, it comes in as a texture node with our texture already preloaded into it. So how is this going to work? So how exactly is this texture going to work to control our roughness? Well, if we solo this, so this is what Darren was saying, we have a lovely little button here, so a little S key here, little S button, sorry, which is going to solo the node. And what we're going to do, we're going to see exactly how it's projecting onto our surface. As we can all probably agree, and as we can all see, it's looking a little bit strange. So before we actually get into it controlling our roughness, let's actually fix its projection first. Otherwise, it's all going to look a little bit strange. So people who are used to working inside of Cinema 4D will know that inside of material tags, if I just sort of find this one down here, inside of our material tags, we have the ability to control our projection, but this doesn't always work. And so inside of Redshift, there is actually a way that we can effectively fix the projection, and it's going to almost ignore the UVs on our object, and it's going to try and project this texture as accurately as it possibly can using this node. And that node is something called a TriPlanar. So if I drop in my TriPlanar, and if I solo my TriPlanar, just so we can see exactly what it's doing, everything's going to go red. So let's take a little look at our settings in here. So what's happening? So the TriPlanar, at the moment, we have a checkbox that says same image on each axis. And then we have our image X, Y, and Z. So if I disable that, what the TriPlanar is doing is it's assigning a different color, whether our red, green, and our blue, to our different axes of our X, Y, and our Z. And then what we can do, we can actually control a blend amount. So if we sort of come in a little bit closer, so we can see where these lines sort of mix, we can increase our blend amount, and it's going to try and blend between, so you can see here especially, it's going to try and blend between those different images and those different axes. This is effectively what the TriPlanar is going to do, but in our case, we don't want to have 3 separate images. We want to just use this one individual image to then create this entire thing. So let me go back and reset that to the default. Go back to same image on each axis. We're going to solo this again, because I want to show you guys exactly how different this is going to look. I'm going to connect my texture to my TriPlanar. We're going to go image X, because remember that was our red area. And if I solo my TriPlanar, we're now getting a really sort of a much better projection, a much more accurate projection.
Yeah, and
here.
This is also why, like, I don't care so much about how a material is previewed. You know, I want to see how it's rendered, because that's where you're getting the best feedback.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. So now we fixed that projection. Let's get back to that conversation about how our texture, how this particular kind of grayscale texture map can be used to control our roughness or other inputs. So as we saw, we have a roughness value of between 0 and 1, but what it's doing is it's doing that all over our surface. So what we can do, we can use these values here, these white to black values, and they translate to the numerical values here. What does that mean? Ellie, what are you talking about? Basically, everything that is represented by a 100% black color equals a roughness value of 0. So we're going to have, so all those areas that are black, those black areas, they're going to be glossy and they're going to be shiny because they're going to have 0 roughness. On the other end of the scale, everything that is 100% white is going to be represented by a roughness value of 1, therefore is going to be super rough. And then everything that is in between, so those grayscale values in between, are going to be ranging between 0 and 1. And so what that means is, if I plug this texture into my roughness, I'm then going to get a whole range of different, was that a sneeze again?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Bless you. We're going to get a whole range of different roughness values across the surface of my material, and it's going to create a really kind of just like really cool looking detailed effect in comparison to just using a standard set number in here. So let's plug this together. So at the moment, we can see we have a roughness value of 0, super shiny, super glossy material. Well, what we can do, what's nice about C4D nodes is we already have some of our inputs already. So remember everything we're going to do, we're going to be pretty much sort of like inputting to the output surface or to this standard material surface. So I'm going to plug this together. All I do is pull my branch over and it's just going to go pop and it's going to connect to that and I'm going to let go. And now
one of the things I like about this interface is it like snaps.
Yes, it snaps. And so already, I mean, we've literally just done like a couple of things. This already completely changes the way that this material looks.
Looks awesome.
It does.
It looks so much more real just with that one bit.
Yeah, that's what I love so much about this. And then we can continue, we can still come back into our texture. So if we just sort of solo our TriPlanar here, we can come into our texture and we can actually remap our texture. So we can change the scale, the offset and the rotation dependent on how many, let's say we want to enlarge this image, or let's say we want to have perhaps more of them tiling across it. We want to have a bit more detail. So if I just do a scale of 1.5 and 1.5, we're going to get 1.5 times of those tiles now along the surface of our material. And so this is what we have going on here. So I quite like this. I'm pretty happy with it. But before I move on and create...
We just got a perfect question from Emil.
Yeah.
So he's wondering, well, how can you pipe in some sort of gradient to get rid of that extremely rough area?
You read my mind. You read my mind. So yes, we absolutely can do that. So what's great about working this way is we have our, our grayscale values or our black to white values. But what if, like you said, we want to change those values? What if, like for me, it's too rough, too much roughness going on. It's a little bit too, it's too much sort of like of my white values, therefore there's too much roughness. So what we can do, we can use something called a ramp node, and a ramp node can be used for like almost endless purposes, really. But it's common one that I use it for is to really perfect and dial in those black and white values exactly like you would like. So if I double click and I type in the word ramp, I'm going to position it between my TriPlanar and my Redshift standard because I want to, so we're going to take my texture information, we're fixing our projection, we're then going to change our black and white values before it goes into our roughness input. So what we're going to do, amazing feature of C4D nodes pending, we can drag and drop this over the top and it's going to connect between those lines. Again, another amazing feature that I love in C4D nodes. So if I solo my ramp now, we're going to get that same kind of idea. We can see our white values, we can see our black values. But if we come into our attributes of our ramp, let me just sort of pull this over so we can see everything. We can actually adjust these black and white values with this ramp sort of gradient graph here. So if I start to pull my black knot over, you can see that we're almost, increasing these black values. So I can pull this over even more. And so now what's going to happen when I unsolo that, we now have more glossy and sort of less rough areas. So this is a little bit dramatic, what we need. So let's sort of like pull that back over and pull that in there.
Cool. I mean,
very cool to do. And one other thing, so you can do the same with the white values, but one thing I'm going to do here, as I said, we've got a lot of 100% white values going on here. So there's a lot of like intense roughness. And so instead of adjusting or instead of moving this white knot, I'm actually going to double click it and it's going to give me my gradient knot settings. It's going to give me my colors and I'm going to adjust my value. And so at the moment, these white values here being represented by this white knot. So if I put this onto 75%, what it's going to do, it's effectively going to colorize those white values with this slightly off white, which remember is going to be a slightly off of 100% roughness. And so now we're not getting as much of a really, really sharp contrast. And so we could pull this even more. We could, you know, maybe do 50% if we wanted. But that is a really useful trick if you do want to, if you're happy with your texture sort of projection, but you do want to sort of dial in those values. This is how we can do so. So remember we have our texture, our TriPlanar is fixing our projection, our ramp is now affecting and tweaking those black and white values, and then it's plugged into our roughness, but it could be plugged into pretty much any of these settings. And so it's not just the roughness, but in our case, it's controlling our roughness. Okay, so let's sort of quickly move on because I'm very aware that I'm super running out of time. I wanted to create this cool material.
25 minutes.
Oh God, we're going to be running over. You've all been pre-warned. Okay, cool. So next part, let's set up some bump. Let's set up some surface imperfection because that's going to now really, you know, take this to the next level. Because at the moment, even though we've got our nice roughness, everything is still super smooth. So we want to add some bumpiness. And so we're going to be doing sort of like enabling our bump channel, but instead we're going to be using a bump node. So what I'm going to do for the sake of this, I'm actually going to get a different texture map. So what we could do, we could use this same texture map to define our bump, but we don't want to do that. We want to create a cool detailed material, right? So which one do we want to go for? Let's go. Oh God, I'm really spoiled for choice. Let's go for this one.
It's, you know, it's crazy because it's like we start throwing in all these textures and they start building up really quickly. And then the more and more that we do this, the more and more we dial it back and make it more subtle. You know what I mean? But anyway, yeah. Sorry, Ellie.
No, it's cool. No, for the sake of this, we're doing more is more. We're gonna go crazy with it. So I'm gonna do this exact same thing, you know, texture, TriPlanar. But what I may even do, I may actually just sort of scale this one down. So it's gonna be sort of effectively bigger on our surface, and I'm going to use this to control the bump on the surface of this standard material. So what we need to do here, we need to grab ourselves a bump node, and this is going to be, you know, enabling our bump. I'm going to drop this into here, and then we want to connect our things together. So I'm going to put my little branch over here, and it's going to say, what do you want to do? And the chances are a lot of it is going, you're plugging an output color into some kind of input. So I'm going to go into my input, and then my bump map output, you guessed it, goes into the already set up bump map channel. So I'm going to plug that in, and then it's going to have a think about it. And let's get a bit closer so we can see what's going on. So we can now see we've got some really intense bumpiness going on. So if I click my bump map, let's take a look at our attributes. So the main things we're going to look at here is this input map type, and it's going to be also our height scale. Those are the two settings that we're most focused on for this session. So our input map type, if we drop this down, we have three options: height field, tangent space normal, and object space normal. We used to have a normal map node. That is sort of, it's a bit of a legacy node now, because the idea is the bump map node can be used and should be used for all bump maps and all grayscale texture maps and also all normal maps. All you need to do is make sure you put the relevant input map type in. So, before I guessed it, if you're using a bump map or a grayscale map, height field is the way to go. If you're working with a normal map, you'll need to choose between one of your normal settings. Majority of the time, tangent space normal is the go-to for your normal map. So because we're not using a normal map, I can leave this on height field. And then the only other thing we do want to adjust is our height scale. So you know when you're working with C4Ds, materials, standard materials, when you enable your bump, it has like a percentage. By default, I think it's set to 20%. Think of this height scale in like a similar kind of way. So that percentage used to be the amount of bump. Think of this height scale in a similar kind of way. So a value of 1, as we can see on here, is pretty intense. It's pretty, you know, it's a bit more than perhaps what we need. So I'm actually going to reduce this value down to something like 0.2 and see if that works perfectly for what we need. So that seems okay. It may still be a little bit intense, but I do also want you guys to be able to see it in the stream. So I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, and the bump, like what we're doing in the roughness, the reflection roughness, that's another way to fake bump. You know, because if there wasn't any roughness, then the reflection would be roughened by the bumpiness.
Very true. Right, so I'm just grabbing my backdrop on here. So literally my backdrop is just like, it's just like a standard material on here, but it's going to make this look pretty cool. And let's get back into this material. Okay, cool. Right, so we've got this going on. So let's continue to build this up a little bit further by using one of the tricks that we learned last week, which was the material blender. We're going to blend some different materials together just to create a more interesting looking texture. So remember again about, you know, thinking about layering materials. So now we started off with our nice metal, our nice fresh car paint. And then we've layered up, we've created a little bit of roughness and a little bit of bumpiness, which has maybe sort of happened over time. So now I'm thinking, okay, the longer this goes on, what are the other layers I could add to it? I could have that, like that dripping sort of texture going on. We can add some scratches. And so that's my thought process behind building up this steampunk texture. And that's basically what we're going to do now. And I like to do a lot of my sort of like layering with a material blender. So we can use like a color layer, but I like to stick with a material blender. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag and drop this between the material we just set up and my output. And what it's done is it's automatically assigned this first material to our base color material. And if we just scroll down, we don't have a lot of settings. We have a lot of inputs, we don't have a lot of settings. What we have is a bunch of different layers, so we can layer up different materials, and then we can add what's called a blend color. Best way to think of blend color is a layer mask in Photoshop. What we're going to do is we can use a grayscale, we can use black and white values, we can use grayscale values, and we can use those as our blend color, which is going to work as a blending mask between these two textures. Let's just pull these up. And what I'm going to do, I'm actually just going to duplicate this Redshift material, this standard material, because it's already got my base properties set up. So I don't want to have to worry about setting them up again. So I'm going to command click and drag, and then we're going to have this material again. And I'm going to just solo that so we can see everything. So from here, what I'm going to do, I may just sort of like get some roughness going on here, just so I can see exactly what it looks like. And then let's do do we go lighter or do we go darker? Let's go darker. Let's go like dingier. So we've got like a sort of like darker looking material. Maybe even we go darker again. Yeah. Yeah, let's see. I'm unsure about this, but we might tweak this. I'm also trying to remember.
Another thing about the new standard material is with the metalness workflow, the brightness affects how how reflective it is. So in the base color.
That is good to know. Yeah, maybe I'll go, maybe we'll go lighter, because I want to make it visible enough for everyone to see. So let's go with this. I might always change it, but yeah, we'll see. Okay, cool. So now what I'm going to do, so I've defined my second material. I'm going to drop that in as my layer 1, because I've already defined my base color. So this is going to be my layer 1 material color. And then now what I need to do is I need to use something as that blending mask or that blending color. And again, we can use a grayscale texture map. So I am obsessed with this one here. I love how this looks, and I love just like the kind of the aesthetic that it creates. So I'm going to use this one as my blending mask. And again, without even soloing it, I know I'm going to need my TriPlanar. So let's plug these in and let's solo my TriPlanar so we can see how this looks. Okay, so it looks okay. We may find you want to scale it down a little bit. Again, all of this is going to be dependent on the kind of shot you're creating and the kind of model that you're using and the kind of size that you're going with. Sort of like I'm changing these things based on the way that I'm seeing it inside of the render view. Okay, so now what I can do, I can drop that into my blend color. It's going to have a little think about it. And what's happening is it's kind of the wrong way around. So all the white, sort of the 100% white, is being represented by this second color, and everything that is sort of black or sort of basically gray in this case is showing this color, but we want it to be the other way around. And so again, we can use a ramp for a different purpose. We can drop in our ramp.
There's another one of those interactivity things about the nodes versus the shader graph.
Yeah.
You just dropped it right onto the line and it connected.
Dropped it right. Yeah, that is probably my favorite feature of the node editor. Over solo, definitely.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is, because these colors are effectively the wrong way around, I'm just going to invert. So we're not worried about our ramp, we're just worried about our adjustment. We're going to invert those, and we can see it's now inverted those colors. Unsolo that, and we're now getting the right colors. And I really like I love this texture map. I really like the way that it projects and the way that it looks. And all this is doing is literally blending between our initial color and our second color, our second material here. And again, you know, instead of even worrying about setting up new things, I can just sort of plug these in here, just so we have that same roughness going on inside of here, and we have that same bump going on inside of here as well, which is really nice. And so I may reduce my bump, but for now it's okay. Okay, final layer before we then move on to some very quick render settings, because I promised that I would get you guys a good steampunk material, and I don't want to let anyone down. So we're going to create one final material, and what we're going to do, final time.
Make them all happy, Ellie.
But why?
Yeah, there's too many.
There's too many. Right, cool. So what we want to do, we want to have like a just sort of like a dark material, because I'm imagining like the paint's been, or the metalness has been like scratched off, and we've got this sort of like just this black underlayer, pretty much. That's what we've got. Like, so that's all I'm doing with this. Just sort of changing some of these settings, just not too fussed about the color. I would normally spend a bit more time on this, but as you can see, I am a little bit stretched for time. So this is going to be our layer 2, which is effectively our third material. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this to create some scratches, because, you know, scratches just really, you know, finish things off. Cool. So as you can see, we've got so many amazing different scratches inside of here. What do I want to go for? What do I want to go for? Let's go for, I love these two. Let's go for this one. Drag and drop that in there. Let's just do a little quick save. And then for the final time, we're going to do the exact same setup as we did before, but we're going to add, we're going to do something a little bit different afterwards. I'm going to show you a little, another little trick that we haven't gone through yet. So let's do our setup. We do our TriPlanar. Have a quick look at how it looks. By soloing our TriPlanar, I'm going to scale this down because I want to have really kind of like faint and small scratches. So by scaling it down, I'm effectively going to increase the number. Let's go 3 and 3. And let it sort of do its thing. Okay, cool. There we go. You know what? Let's go 2 and 2. Cool. And now all we need to do is we need to plug this guy into our blend color. And let it think about it. Okay, so let's see if we can get a bit closer and see some of these scratches. So they're not super visible. So let's go into our ramp and let's make them a little bit more visible by tweaking our black and white values. So let's take a look. I think I'm going to pull my white values up.
I do this all the time when I'm creating masks or blend text.
Use the ramp.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Have to.
Right. I don't want to go too crazy with it, but I want them to be visible enough for everyone to see. So there we go. So I pulled my white values because my white values are what are going to be represented by this black color here. So I sort of let it do its thing. Can we see that? They're not super visible, are they?
Is in the material blender, what's the okay. Yeah, so black is not visible, white is visible, right?
Yeah.
And you have it tiled, so they're small.
Okay, cool. There we go. I can see them now.
Okay.
I think if I let it play a little bit, we'd be able to see them, but I want them to be like super visible for everyone to be able to see. So hopefully you guys can see now. We have sort of like some scratches here, some scratches here, scratches here. Yeah, all over basically.
I can totally see them. It is really subtle, but it's definitely adding. Yeah.
Cool, but subtle's good. I'm doing this stuff a little bit sort of more intense than I normally would, purely because I want it to be showing through the live stream. But yeah, like subtlety is key here. Like low values when you render will really make sort of like a nice difference. If everything's exaggerated, you then lose that sort of that realistic look. Unless that's the style you're going for, then cool. And don't let me tell you otherwise. So the final thing I did want to do, so basically this is what I did. I think I had one more layer, but it's effectively the same kind of stuff that we're doing. But the one final thing I did want to show is let's say we also wanted to use these scratches. So these scratches and these dents should be marks on the surface. They shouldn't just be color. They should also be sort of like adding like indents to our surface. However, on our base material, we've already got a bump texture set up. But what we can do is not only can we blend materials, but we can also blend bump and we can also blend displacement. And so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab a bump map. I'm going to pull all of this over. So let's get a bit closer. Pull all this over. And I'm going to grab a bump blender. And then we're just going to unplug that and we're going to plug that into there. And so our bump blender is similar-ish to our material blender, can take a base and layers 0 to 2. And then we can control our blending weight between them. And so let's grab my scratches, put them into a bump map, because remember we want them to be, you know, sort of, we want to enable the sort of like bump for those textures. We're then going to plug this into my bump blender. So we now have our 2 different bump map setups. And then we can control our blending weight. So 0 is going to be 100% this sort of like first bumpiness, and 1 is going to be 100% my scratches. But if we do a 0.5 value, it's going to be a 50% combination of the 2. And then we can minus this value. And so then effectively my sort of scratches will become like indents. And so now we can see, especially sort of like round here on these sort of areas here, we've combined that bumpiness to, instead of just making those scratches look like they're sort of like on the surface color, they're now actually creating indentations inside of our surface. And so this is what we just created, which all looks a little bit crazy and messy.
Wow.
But effectively what it is just blending those 3 different materials using different texture maps, blending a little bit of bump going on. And we've created a steampunk texture purely by using a few materials and by using some assets in the asset browser. And it's similar-ish. I mean, it's not too far from the one here. So I'm very aware that it's 5.2 and I've not even got to render settings, which is not ideal. However,
Elly gets a slow clap. I mean, that's awesome. You totally nailed it.
So, oh God, there is more that I wanted to talk about. So let me just, let me talk about it on here just for sort of like convenience. So this emissive material here, if we just open this up, as we can see, it's not a very advanced material at all. It's literally just a default Redshift material. And if we go over to an overall tab, we have an emission color and an emission weight. That is all we have on here. And we have this really cool sort of like glowy emissive material. The glow is being caused by a bloom post effect. And so if I sort of increase, if I just move this over, if I increase and decrease the intensity of my bloom, we can see that we can actually create a really cool glow similar to we do in like C4D standard materials. Let me just pull that back down. The other thing I want to talk about really quick is, so we worked with the standard material, so the Redshift standard material, which is the new one, but there is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be using the default Redshift material. So when I double click, I get this one here, and basically it's a different set of base properties. But my favorite thing about this default material is it actually comes with some custom presets. So if I drop this down, so there's not loads of them, but what it does have are really great sort of starting points. And like Darren, I know we definitely talked about this beforehand, that before the standard material, we used to just sometimes create the normal material here, set up a preset, and then make some adjustments, and they look great.
Yep.
So like even though yeah, exactly. It's a perfect starting point, and they're really great, especially when you're first getting into Redshift. There is no reason why you shouldn't be using these presets, not only to speed up your workflow, but to just start to get some nice materials, see how they're broken down. Like, yes, we're using the standard material a lot, and I used it in this instance because I wanted to demonstrate it and sort of show how we can create a metal material, but that does not mean that we sort of no longer use this Redshift material, this sort of this original default one, because it is, yeah, it's extremely powerful as well. Right, okay.
So you did the emission color, which is like the color of that emission, and then the weight is how much of that light is coming out, and then you put that post effects. What was it called?
The bloom post effects.
Bloom.
Yes, so if we go to our settings, we have our bloom post effects here, which we can enable and disable and enable. And then we have like a threshold, which is the first thing you're going to want to sort of adjust, and then adjust your intensity. And as we can see, it's doing it not only on our emissive material, but on our light. We've got an area light inside of here as well.
I always do that the other way around. I turn the intensity like really high, and then I adjust the threshold to get, like, I'll put the intensity to like 10 or 100, and then I'll adjust the threshold so that I'm sort of bringing in the bloom to where I want it, and then the softness, and then I bring back down the intensity.
Ah, that's cool. That's cool. Okay, cool. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about render settings, but what I'm also then going to talk about is the Redshift hands-on workshop, where you can find all of this information in a lot more detail, because I'm very aware that we have run out of time. Like, this 2 hours goes way too quickly. So let's quickly cut back to this original one. And if anyone has any like really specific questions on like render settings while I'm doing this, drop them in. Darren can answer them. We can answer them live. If it's stuff that you really, really want to know, let us know now whilst I'm sort of spending the next 5 minutes speeding through the most important render settings. Okay, so let's say we've finished this off and we're super happy, super satisfied with our amazing piece of artwork. That now is a time where we would then define our render settings and actually get that final result out. So inside my render settings, we have our normal output and our normal save settings, things that you are perhaps used to if you've worked in 3D software or in Cinema 4D before. If not, effectively your output is the output resolution of your final render. So we have our width and height things here. We can define that. We can change our presets based on the type of output resolution you want. We could like HD 1920 by 1080. We could do like Instagram ones, which is basically the reverse of that. When we have our resolution and we have our frame range, if we're doing an animation, our save, super important. It's where you're going to be saving your still image or your PNG sequence or your MP4. Multipass is important for AOVs, but I don't think we won't have time to cover those today. However, they have been talked about in previous sessions, and I can link you guys to some useful stuff for that without having to rush through them very quickly. So if we take a look at our render settings, and as we said, those important render settings. If you are brand new to Redshift, there are two modes inside of Redshift. When we click a little tab here, we have a basic mode and we have an advanced mode. Basic mode is all of the important settings you need to first get started. We have a bucket quality, they're effectively presets, and they're going to be defining the quality of your render. If I drop this down and I adjust this to one of the presets, you will notice that our threshold, which is our adaptive error threshold, is getting lower and lower based on the quality of our render. And effectively what this is going to do is the lower the threshold, the cleaner and less noisy your render is going to be, but at a detriment of render time. So let me actually open something up that I did for a training session very recently, not this one. See, this is why you should name things, Ellie. This is why I should name things. Let me quickly do this because I think this is like a really important thing. Basically, I did a render test of low up to very high to sort of explain and show these different render settings. So this was today. Bucket quality test. Bucket quality test. Did I say it? Okay, never mind. I can kind of remember. Right, so I have like the renders out, which I can just load up, and I can roughly remember how long they took. So we have very high, we have high. Let me just sort of squidge these because I want you to be able to see them next to each other, so you can really see like the difference between them.
I love the power of this.
Oh, thanks. This was, yeah, so this was sort of what we worked on last week in last week's color session. It uses like color user data and all those like fun things, and I thought I would do a little render out of it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I did a very quick test and everything is default. I haven't changed anything else apart from the bucket quality. We have low, medium, high, very high. Low, we can agree, is super grainy. It's not kind of like the best quality as we can imagine because it's a low quality render. It took 40 seconds to render this frame. We then have medium, and for me, the difference between low and medium is insane. Like, I think it has the biggest sort of improvement in quality and in noise. And remember, we've not changed anything else. We've not changed GI settings, which are also very important. This took one.
You have to zoom in. You have to zoom in on those because they all look almost identical on my end.
Okay, let me.
Yeah.
Let me do a little. Is that easy to see?
Yeah, like the right part of it with the light and the shadow and the color and where you can see the grain the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is low and this is medium. So we can see there is a massive difference between them and the difference in render time. So this took 40 seconds. This took like 1 minute 50. So just a little bit over double of our render time.
Yeah, I've never done high. I've never rendered at high.
No, so I like to do it just to see, like, for this sort of reason here. And yeah, I don't render at high. So this is the difference between medium and high. And this isn't just the stream. I can't see much of a difference here either.
Yeah.
And the render time was like 1:50 versus 3 minutes something. So it doubled the render time of my frame. And it's just, the quality is just not like this. It's not worth that extra render time. So this bucket quality is pretty important. The last one is, let's do between medium and very high. So let's zoom in here. Too many zooms in. So here I can actually see a nice difference, not as much as between low and medium. However, you're all going to be astonished by. So let's do. Okay, Darren, how long do you think this took? So it's 40 seconds, 1:50, 3 minutes, like 40. What do you reckon very high was? Feel free to put in the questions area.
So high was almost 2 minutes. I'm going to say very high was like 40.
I know. So okay, it wasn't that crazy, but it was 12. It was 12 minutes.
Wow.
It was 12 minutes for a single frame.
That's
and I mean, it's nice. It's nice, but come on. And so that's what I like to talk about this. And the reason I did those sort of previews was actually it was for a customer training session, but they come in handy because I think some people, they look at this and they go, oh, I just want to have a really nice looking render, so I'm going to hit very high, without understanding, how much it's actually going to have a difference to their thing. And they're probably sitting there thinking, oh, why's my animation been rendering for 24 hours? So bucket quality is very important. As Darren said, he does a lot of stuff on medium. I do majority of my stuff on medium as well.
Actually, Elly, I do the majority of my stuff between low and medium.
Do you? Okay. I stick to medium.
For like how much I'm jumping around between different files and rendering, medium is too slow for me. So I'll do between low and medium, or low, and then I'll use a denoiser if there is not a lot of like detailed textures in, roughness and transparency and volume fog and all that stuff.
You know what? That's such a good statement to make as well. Like on the topic of denoising, because I remember like back in the day, I used to really be like anti denoising. I was like, no, it doesn't really like do anything. But then someone challenged me to be like, hey, can you make like a cool looking, like someone on one of these live shows was like, hey, can you make like a okay looking motion graphics render for under 30 seconds a frame? And of course I love a challenge. And I managed to I did a low quality bucket render on with denoising on. And it actually, when it came to like the motion, like graphic stuff, because everything's moving around, you've got like pretty basic materials. It was just kind of like a couple of like brightly plastic colored materials. And it was 30 seconds a frame. And it actually looked like I would say passable. And so yeah, denoising, if like Darren said, you're not working with like super high detail, volumetrics or things like that. So in this case, I perhaps wouldn't use it. Because we've got like some detail going on, we've got some like volume fog going on, but and definitely
if you have very fine textures and they're very precious to your results, then denoising can sort of break that result.
Yeah, it's basically like a filter pass that goes over the top and is going to sort of like blur some of those, basically some of those like edges, some of those colors, which can be really nice, but in certain cases cannot.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So bucket quality is one of those things that if we're sort of like sticking to our basic tab, but do sort of like be cautious of what you do set up here. And again, like we were saying, dependent on your scene, denoising can work. We also have our motion blur settings and we have our depth settings. And so this is effectively how many times a ray of this type can travel and bounce. Yeah, so if you have a lot of like reflections, what was that?
I was just saying to everyone, and you shouldn't really have to mess with those. One thing that Elly does not have here, because she's on a Mac, is sorry, Els, is what is it? The hardware ray tracing?
Yes. See, I don't have it. I know what it is, but I don't have it.
I mean, I'm happy to show it if you want to shoot it over me, but that I actually have on by default because it does, it always shaves off at least, you know, at least
do you want me to literally, let me fire it over.
Okay.
Let me fire it over. Because it's always, it's something, one of those things that I can never ever show. So yes.
Sure. Did I click on the right button?
Yes.
Okay, so here's my latest render. So boom, right there, hardware ray tracing if available. Yeah, turn this on, and if it's not already on, and then go window customization, save as default scene, so that every time you you go to you open up a file, you'll render with this on and you'll save a little bit of time. Yep, that's it.
Cool. Well, thanks for showing that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, because one of those things I can never show. Oh, cool. Sorry, mine froze then for a sec. We're back. Can you see my screen?
Yes,
I hope you can see my screen.
Oh, see your screen.
Okay, so it is 10 past. I'm very aware that we're very drastically have run out of time, and I'm very sorry, but I do want to talk about all the stuff that we haven't got to can actually be found on the Hands-on with Maxon Redshift workshop. And so before we wrap up, also thank you to everyone who is still here with us. Don't worry, it will be worth your time, I assure you. So if we head over to the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel, where you can find all the amazing stuff that we're doing, which we're actually going to talk about when we round this up in a couple of minutes. If we scroll down to Hands-on with Maxon, the same playlist that you can find all the sessions that we have just done. So the C4D Level Up Workshop can be found in here. You can also find all the other Hands-on with Maxon workshops all inside this playlist. And they're all in chronological order. So just before this Level Up workshop, we did an intro to rigging with Joe Herman, which was amazing. He did a 6-part series of getting started in rigging in Cinema 4D. But just before that, there is a 4-part series on an intro to Redshift. And so what we do, we go into all of the stuff that we've covered today, but in so much more detail. So everything was covered by a 2-hour session. So what I mean by that is we did a getting started, which was 2 hours. We then did 2 hours on node materials, 2 hours on lights, cameras, and post effects. And then the final 2 hours is basically building a cyberpunk render, looking at render settings, looking at AOVs. So I feel really bad that we haven't got to that today. However, I wouldn't want to rush through it. But all of that information is super relevant still. Disclaimer, it was done in version 25 and therefore was done in the previous version of Redshift. The materials are created in the shader graph, but everything is transferable to the node editor, and everything is done using the Redshift menu at the top. So if you are new and you want to follow along, then the shader graph is the way that we worked, and then you can just remember we can go into our renderer into Redshift and we can add that main menu, and then it's going to just make everything a little bit more sort of user friendly when following that workshop. Just below that as well, so the idea, you know, with this Level Up workshop is it was kind of the next step up from the beginners workshop, but I was aware that a few people were asking questions about some of the stuff that we did cover in that beginners workshop. So for example, the MoGraph tools and the cloner and all of that stuff we did inside of the R25 part 5 MoGraph. And again, a lot of this stuff is transferable. It was done in version 25, so it doesn't have the new tools of 26 or the new simulation things. But a lot of the stuff, again, is very similar. And another upside is it's all done using Cinema 4D's standard and physical renderer. So if you're not using Redshift or you're not sort of like looking to sort of go on to Redshift yet, then not to worry, head over to that beginners workshop, and especially inside of rendering and materials and lighting, and it will teach you all the things that you need to know. It was me and Matt in the same way that we sort of did these ones here. Right, so before let's do a little bit of a wrap up here. So let's go back to my little keynote, and then I'll let you guys go and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
I got to make a quick note real quick. You have global illumination on, and I just want to tell everyone that if you are using a dome light and you're getting most of your lighting from your dome light, then try rendering without global illumination. And I suspect you're going to find not a huge difference in the lighting, but you'll notice a slightly shorter render time.
Yes, that's such a great tip. Thanks, Darren.
You're welcome.
I feel like, Darren, you've been coming with like all the tips today. It's been great.
I feel like I didn't have enough. You did everything.
No, you killed it. No, wow. You killed it, trust me.
Thank you.
So before we wrap this up, first of all, like, thank you to everyone for being here. I'm going to do my thank yous at the end, but I do want to do a quick thank you now. And I do want to talk about some further learning, because unfortunately, this is the end of our C4D Level Up workshop. Don't worry, it's definitely not the end of you guys seeing me, seeing Darren, and seeing the training team, because we've totally got you covered with further learning and with more sessions that we have going on as an entire sort of training collective. So the first thing here is, don't forget that all of these sessions have been recorded, and pretty much all of the sessions we do as a Maxon training team get recorded, and they get uploaded onto the Maxon training team YouTube channel. And so these sessions can be found exactly on that playlist that we just saw, titled Hands On. And we had a request last week of a PDF of the Q&A over these last 6 weeks, and I absolutely love this idea. I did it for the Redshift workshop, and people really liked it, and so we're going to do that. I'm going to try my best to get this done by the middle of next week, because as you can imagine, going through all of your incredible questions over the last 6 weeks can take a little bit of time, and I want to make sure I get like a decent answer or a tutorial or something on there for each answer. And then once I do that, I will upload that onto the same Dropbox link. So yeah, that is pending. It's definitely happening, because I think that is a great idea. Yeah, for sure, definitely a great idea. So let's talk about sessions, because as I said, you know, this isn't the last time you're going to be seeing us. The entire training team are working so hard every single week to bring as much content and as much kind of like educational information as we can across the Maxon tools. So on Mondays, we do a demystifying post-production series, where basically every month we have a brand new topic. Over July, we have the topic titled The Wonderful World of Particles, and we're diving into a bunch of incredible particle information. It's been Lionel, it's been Chad, they had Bob Walmsley on Monday from Insidium, and they're going through a bunch of different techniques in different software. So the first week, so I think we've already done 2 parts. So there's 2 parts done, 2 parts left. First week was on C4D native particles, really interesting. Lionel went through some amazing stuff, and then on Monday he went through some stuff with X particles. Chad will be diving into Houdini, which is going to be amazing, and also Trapco Particular, and I believe perhaps some more tools as well. So yeah, definitely check that out. And if by some sheer chance all of these shows don't answer your questions, then every other Thursday, so every 2nd and 4th Thursday in the month, we run an Ask the Trainer live stream on YouTube, where you can basically come hang out with a bunch of us trainers and ask us questions. Just ask us questions about the stuff that you want to know, the stuff that you need help with in your projects, or just come and hang out and say hey with us. Like, we're going to be there. Darren's normally there, Jonas is there, Noseman's there. And what we do is we sometimes tailor these to be a specific discipline or a specific feature inside of Cinema 4D. So for example, tomorrow we do have an Ask the Trainer live at 4 p.m, which I think is 8 a.m. Pacific time. And it's covering all things to do with UV workflows, which I know is a super kind of important topic. And it's a topic that a lot of people do ask about. I know I've been asked about it a lot in workshops. And so we got you covered, people. And then we also have another YouTube live show, which is Max's color grading show, Max on Color, and that is alternate Thursdays to ATT. So if you ever want to know anything about color grading, color tips, color management, ACEs, all of that amazing stuff, then definitely head over to Max on Color, Max's show. It is incredible. And he has some amazing guests on there as well, which is really great. And then if VFX and just having the best time ever is your thing, then check out on Fridays Seth, Hashi and Michael's VFX and Chill, which is their weekly live talk show where they break down some amazing VFX tips and tricks. They look at stuff that's happening in the movies, on TV, and they really tailor it to the stuff that's happening now. And they also get incredible artists and designers on there. I know they've had like the team from Perception on there where they break down shots for like the different Marvel films. And so that is an incredible show, again, with amazing guests. And the newest member of our family, even though they're not new anymore, we're all just like this now, is ZBrush. And they, believe it or not, do a stream every single day with their incredible wide range of ZBrush artists. And that is on ZBrush Live.
Usually more than one every day. Crazy.
Yeah, it is, and they're like 2 to 3 hours each. So if you're enjoying these sessions going over 2 hours, you're definitely going to like that. If ZBrush is what you want to get into, it's definitely something I'm sort of looking to learn, looking to get into. Then head over to pixelogic.com/ZBrush Live. And if you want to see what's coming up and register for all of these incredible events and shows and live streams that we just talked about, then all you have to do is head over to the maxon.net events page. And before we wrap up, there is a couple more slides, but I do want to say when we close this webinar, when we end this workshop, some of you may know already, there is a feedback page that comes up, and we absolutely love hearing about your feedback. I especially, and I'm sure the others do, I read all of your comments, all of your feedback, all of your suggestions at the end of every single one of these sessions, because I really do want these to be, and as do the guys, as does the whole team, and as does Maxon, we want these to be the best possible workshops and help you, educate you on your journey as best as we can. And so trust me when I say, when you suggest a topic, we genuinely listen and we genuinely talk about it in our meetings and go, hey, so-and-so mentioned this, and they thought this would be a cool topic, and maybe next month we can do a series on this. So please do let us know what you want to know, especially stuff that we haven't covered before, because honestly, like Darren can vouch for this, we talk about it, we take your considerations on board, and it's exactly what we plan our time around.
Yeah, and if you don't believe Elly, then listen to me when I tell you that we're not going to get paid for doing this if we're not giving you guys what you want. You're not going to watch. We're going to lose our jobs, and we're no longer going to be living this fun life of creating 3D graphics.
Yeah. So if do it for us, guys. So yes, please let us know, and it could be on any of the Maxon tools. So Cinema 4D, Redshift, Red Forge, and ZBrush. Let us know, and even let us know how I could have made this workshop better for you guys, or what you liked about it, or what you didn't like. Let me know, because I do a lot of these hands-on sessions. I do a lot of the live sessions, but the hands-on ones are like my little baby. We do the C4D level up, we do the Redshift, we do the beginners workshop, and they are recurring sessions. They're recurring workshops throughout the year. And so if there is something I can do better, or something you'd like to see, maybe a slightly different kind of way that we do them, let me know, because at the end of the day, I want these to be as good as they can be for you. And so I really do value what you do like and what you don't like as well. Let me just go to my next page. If you are new to one of our shows, then first of all, where you been? We like to give away free t-shirts on our shows across like all of our live shows. And so if you head over to the handout section inside of GoToWebinar, don't worry if you've downloaded it before, because I've added something secret to the bottom of the page. Basically, at the very bottom, all you got to do is scroll down, and it says free t-shirt. And there is a super secret link in there. It's not the normal merch link, it's a very secret one. And all you have to do, type in the coupon code Particle Magic, and you guys get a free t-shirt. There's no strings attached. All you have to do is pay for shipping, which is like £4 or something like that, and then you can represent, you know, along with us with these cool shirts. We've got Maxon One, we've got Red Giant, we've got Cinema 4D ones, we've got Redshift ones. So I want to sort of like be able to give you guys this as a thank you for being part of this workshop. And so first of all, I'm going to do my thank yous now. First of all, I want to thank everyone who is here, who was here live with us, who is still here as I overrun by 20 minutes, apparently every single Wednesday. You know, that's what I like to do. Everyone who's watching this on YouTube, really appreciate it. You know, I'm so glad that you guys hopefully have enjoyed these workshops as much as I have. Thank you for all of your questions, for being here with us, for all of your lovely comments, all of your feedback, all of your suggestions. It really does help make each of these better and better every week. I do want to thank Matt, even though he's not here, like he is like my guy who I do this with, like we plan this workshop. Like I'm sure he'll be gutted that he wasn't on this last one to say goodbye and thank you to you all, but we are missing you, Matt. Thank you so much. And finally, thank you to you, Darren, for jumping in. Like I honestly don't know how I'd have done this session by myself. Like I'm so grateful for you being here. And so basically yesterday in our training meeting, the guys found out that I was going to be doing this by myself because Matt's on holiday, which was totally cool. And Darren offered to get up very early in his morning to come and hang with us all, answer your questions, which I haven't even been looking at the questions, but I know you've been answering them all and, you know, chatting with everyone, which I think is so great. So thank you so much for, you know, jumping on and hanging out with us.
You're welcome. It was awesome. You covered so much.
So much. I always like to, you know, overfill this time apparently. And so it's not goodbye. It's not goodbye because I'm going to see you guys and Darren's going to see you guys and the whole team are going to see you on one of our shows, whether it's Ask the Trainer tomorrow, whether it's VFX and Chill, whether it's Demystifying Post-Production on Monday. We will be here. We will be around. And so all I'm going to say is I'll see you guys soon. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday and an amazing rest of your week. And it's been a real pleasure doing this workshop with you all. And I shall, see you all soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.